Okay.
If you don't want to share this publicly, no worries, we won't, but we'll record it purely so that anybody who wants to claim CPD credits can claim CPD credits. We have to keep a recording for audit purposes. But everyone, thank you so much for joining us this evening for this week's edition of Global Lawyers of Canada Virtual Mentor Office Hours with Larry Linton tonight. We are very excited to welcome Larry back. He joined us back in December for our celebration Virtual Mentor Office Hours, which was a real treat for us to have him join us. And he shared a little snippet of his life as a lawyer and beyond. And he's agreed to come back tonight and actually go a little bit more detail and tell us the good, the bad, and the ugly of his life in law and beyond. So Larry, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Okay, well, thank you. Thanks for having me back. I was thinking about that title for a while now, and really the good and the bad and the ugly immediately came to mind when I thought about my life in law, because it has spanned 3 countries and 30 years. And I've experienced all of those, but not necessarily in that order. So I'm taking the liberty of revising that title to the ugly, the bad, and the good. It's not as catchy, I admit, but it's more accurate. So I'll start. I was born in South Africa. My father passed away at the age of 45. I was 6. So essentially I was raised by my widowed mother. Being the youngest of a family of 3 siblings, I spent a lot of time with my mom. She worked hard to provide for me and used to leave for work before I was awake most days. As was typical in South Africa at the time, my mother employed a domestic helper by the name of Eugenia to help us in our small apartment in Johannesburg. And her chores included making our beds, doing the laundry, cooking meals, cleaning the apartment, and essentially helping me get ready for school in the mornings. We were by no means wealthy, and I had no appreciation of the fact that the simple color of my skin afforded me privileges that Eugenia and the majority of the population didn't enjoy themselves. For example, I had no idea that Eugenia woke up every morning at 3 o'clock in her designated township to begin the daily commute to our apartment. This entailed her catching 2 buses and a train, and those were specifically reserved for the Black population, and then having to walk 2 kilometers to our apartment. I never knew that she could be stopped at any time by a police officer and requested to produce her ID card, that she could have been detained if she didn't.
Bear with us. There's tech issues. We'll get it fixed. I feel like we need some elevator music whilst we just wait.
With his frozen picture, it looks like we could do a weekend at Bernie's thing with him.
Oh, wouldn't that be lovely? Oh, that would be so lovely. Sitting on a patio with your favorite beverage, the sun shining on you, surrounded by people. That would be so nice. One day soon, people, we will do that again. Very soon.
Yeah, it's fun. This is my first spring in Vancouver, and it's so nice to see everything blooming and what it looks like. It's really fun.
Yeah, and we're fully into the cherry blossom season right now. So
yeah, they're so beautiful.
Yeah, if you've never been to Vancouver in cherry blossom season, it's like a mini version of what I imagine it would be like in Japan. People go crazy for it. They stand on top of cars and like to get the perfect Instagram shot. And they like hang over people's walls and things. It's crazy. It's really crazy. But it is really beautiful as well. And the magnolias are coming out, which I love magnolias. Yeah. In fact, I can see cherry blossom trees out of my window. Everything has this pink glow to it, which is lovely.
Oh, nice. I've been trying to find those streets you see in the pictures where it's cherry blossoms up and down the streets, but I haven't been able to find them yet.
Oh, go on Vancouver is Awesome. They have a map.
Ooh.
Yeah, there's a link to just type in like Vancouver cherry blossom map and they'll give you a map. And for those of you not in Vancouver, you can do a Google search on it and it'll actually give you all the pictures so you can experience it virtually without all the people. Hopefully Larry will be able to come back. Fingers crossed. I was really into the story.
Yes.
It helps. I was really into it. Like it was really like, okay, I'm engaged in this. And if you ever get the chance to read Larry's book, he writes exactly in the same way that he's talking right now. So his book is exactly the same. It's really engaging. It just starts a little bit later in his life, the book does.
What's the name of the book?
It's called Shaken Not Stirred, Living with Parkinson's Disease.
Oh, that is a clever name.
It's very good, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And Larry looks like in his picture on here, like a little bit like a James Bond character there. So it seemed very appropriate. Let's see if we can message Larry and see.
Yeah, maybe he's on a roll and didn't realize he got kicked off.
Yeah. Check my messages too. Okay, I found a way to communicate with him. Okay, so whilst we wait for Larry to reboot, why don't you guys, someone tell me something good that's happened this week and something bad that's happened quickly. He's back. No, it's gone again.
Well, I got what's good. I got the lottery into the Chicago Marathon. So I've never won a lottery for an entrance before. So I'm super excited. So October 10th. And it's actually bittersweet because 2 years ago, my partner got in and I didn't. And so I had to just watch him run it. So I'm super, super excited about that.
Very cool. Very cool.
And it'll be my 10th marathon on October 10th. So it's just all going to line up.
Wow. Serendipity just happened all at once there, right?
Yeah.
Will you run the full marathon?
Yep.
Wow. That is amazing. You know, the most I could do was to trudge up my way to half a marathon. And then I said, never again. Amazing, amazing. Good luck.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm really excited.
That's very cool. And perfect time of year to train as well. Mm-hmm. Train through like the nice part of the year rather than the awful part of the year here.
Oh, yeah. And I guess the negative is, so vaccines are open and available to everyone in my home of Minnesota. So all my friends are now at least have one shot of their vaccine. And I'm just super jealous. So I'm dealing with a lot of that jealousy.
Yeah.
So I'm just posting pictures of cherry blossoms in the mountains and the oceans to just kind of like be like, okay, things are good here too.
Yeah. That is a very positive thing. I like that. 42.2 kilometers. You've got it. I have some friends who ran Chicago as well. So that they said it was a really fun race to run.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm really excited for it. It's a great course. Just
a nightmare to get to from here.
Yeah. Yeah. Although it's about 6 hours away from Minneapolis where my friends and family are. So I think I'm going to try to, like, assuming everything works, tie it all into a trip to go home and run it.
That would be nice. Larry, we see you again.
Sorry about that. Gee, it always happens, you know.
Oh, it's all good. We just hoped that you weren't like still telling us your story.
Yes, I was finished. I was going to bed. So I've logged on my phone. So should I start again? Hi, I'm Larry.
No, you continue with where you were.
Okay, I don't know where I was.
So you were telling us about Eugenie and her journey to get to you.
Okay, let's see if this works now. Okay. So as was typical in South Africa at the time, my mother employed a domestic helper, Eugenia, to help us in the apartment. And that included making our beds and essentially helping me get ready for school in the morning. And, you know, as was typical in South Africa, I was not from a very wealthy family.
Oh no, Larry.
Am I back?
You're back.
Okay, all right. I'm not touching anything. Okay, for example, I had no idea that Eugenia woke up every morning at 3 o'clock in her designated township to begin the daily commute to our apartment, and that this entailed her catching 2 buses and a train specifically reserved for the black population, and then walking about 2 kilometers to get to our apartment. I never knew that she could be stopped at any time by a police officer and demanded to produce her ID card, and that she could have been detained if she didn't produce it, and that she had to be back in her township by nightfall, failing which she could be arrested or even worse. I didn't know that Eugenia was married and saw very little of her husband, that he was a migrant worker who worked on the mines in atrocious conditions and lived for extended periods of time in a hostel away from her children, and that her children lived with their grandmother in a rural village, only seeing Eugenia for a few weeks a year. But as a law student at a liberal university, I started to learn that the reason for this disparity was based on the fact that the country's laws were legislated across purely racial lines to promote the complete separation of races, opportunities, and education, right down to the separate amenities like washrooms, transport, hospitals, schooling, beaches, and park benches, and that the fundamental right to vote was not granted to persons of color. And that the whole premise of apartheid was premised on the notion of separate but equal. But in my mind, separate could never mean equal. I always looked at the word of apart equals hate. So that was the state of South Africa during my school years and university studies. The country was in a state of emergency, isolated from the world, at war with its neighbors, and fighting with itself. Nelson Mandela was still languishing in prison, and the ANC was committed to an armed resistance, and bombs were going off. So by the time I completed my studies, I was convinced that there was no future for me in South Africa, and I started to think about a life overseas. But I still had to complete my articles of clerkship and qualify as a lawyer. So that brings me to the next stage of my career. After my BA LLB, I had to complete a period of articles to be eligible to write the bar admission exams in South Africa. I soon realized that the practice of law was never as exciting as watching LA Law at the time on TV, or as entertaining as Rumpole of the Bailey. It was boring, and I had very little exposure to the law. Instead, most of the days I dropped the partner's laundry off, collected their kids from school, and fetched clients at the airport. I also was an expert of photocopying and faxing. I soon realized that the trick to getting through this period of time was to devise ways to give the illusion that I was in the office when I wasn't, or to appear that I had urgent work to do at the courthouse when I didn't. The first trick was the old faithful double jacket trick. Very simple, but highly effective. You leave an extra suit jacket behind your chair or hang it behind your door. You leave an open file on your desk and leave the door open. The illusion created was that I must have just stepped out the office and gone to the washroom or the kitchen or to the firm's library to conduct some research. Truth be told, I was enjoying an early lunch. The other was the index and paginate routine. This one required more planning and props. To be effective, you assembled a complete fake file with the same file folders, but with discarded pleadings and correspondence. You have the file and you stride down the corridor with purpose. If confronted by a partner, you answer confidently, "I'm off to the courthouse to index and paginate." Everybody knew what that meant. You had to literally get the judge's file ready for trial. But I didn't. Instead, I was enjoying a midday movie with my mates. This routine lasted until one of my mates, brought a real file to the movie theater and left it when the movie was finished. The manager called the firm, and he was the first person I know that was fired as an articling student. It wasn't me, by the way. Trying to get a job in New Zealand as soon as possible after arrival, I accepted a position at a firm in Auckland in the banking and finance department. It was a bad mistake. I spent my days reviewing secured lending documents with very little client interaction. It was not for me. But again, I had to get through my relicensing exams. I used to look forward to Thursdays in the summer because the firm had a launch, and every Thursday it hosted clients on the Auckland Harbour and in the bays in Hauraki Gulf. I was always invited to attend until a bad thing happened. One particular Thursday, we anchored off a bay, and I was asked to get into a rubber dinghy to take the barbecue to the beach. And as luck would have it, a rogue wave capsized the dinghy and the barbecue fell to the bottom of the Hauraki Gulf. I wasn't invited back. Unfortunately, many years later, something really bad happened. Progressing steadily through my career as a corporate immigration lawyer, I came face to face with a life-altering diagnosis of Parkinson's at the age of 49. It had taken me 3 years to get to that point. By that time, I had tried physio, acupuncture, intravenous naturopathic remedies, even seeing a Chinese herbalist who prescribed something to drink that tasted as nasty as it looked. Unable to comprehend what the diagnosis really meant and how it would impact my career, I decided to live my life in denial. I came up with excuses. Too much coffee was to blame for my tremor, and too much running was to blame for my dragging right leg. In the office, I buried myself in file work and didn't engage with my team, declining team events and client outings. Everybody told me that Parkinson's was not terminal, but in my mind, my life was over. The more I lived in denial, the more my anxiety increased, which caused me to become a recluse. There were days that I couldn't leave the house. When I did, my anxiety increased dramatically, and I was frequently overcome by panic attacks and couldn't wait to get back to my house and to the couch. The couch literally became my comfort zone. And then 2 years ago, I developed more symptoms on my journey with Parkinson's, this time with my executive functioning. I started to forget words and at times have struggled to complete sentences. Don't get me started on computers. I also couldn't retain information and easily forgetting things. There were times in a partner's meeting that I had to ask for the question to be repeated because by the time it got to me, I had forgotten the question. Also, as an immigration lawyer, I always took pride in devising creative and optimal visa strategies for my clients, but I found that I had lost that ability, that critical thought process. Concerned with that, my neurologist suggested a repeat neuropsych assessment, and the results confirmed cognitive impairment, indicating a further progression of the disease. The disease had finally caught up with my career. I could no longer practice law. So that brings me to the last segment, the good. And I guess everybody's asking, what good could follow a diagnosis of a chronic, progressive, and incurable disease that has essentially interrupted my career. You see, 10 years ago, I was just on my life's journey with Parkinson's. I was a mess. I would never have believed it to hear that I would run 3 half marathons in 5 years. And I would return to my love for drumming and play as a percussionist with a band in the internationally renowned Beaches International Jazz Festival. and that I would attain the professional milestone of partner admission years after my diagnosis. I would have found it hard to believe that I would deal with the more recent challenges of cognitive impairment with humility and grace and continue to live as best as life I can, and be fortified and encouraged by comments to inspire me to write a book and add author to my CV would have been a low rank on my bucket list. But 10 years, I've achieved all of this and much more. And in many respects, my life today is more fulfilling, rewarding, and meaningful than at any time before my diagnosis. But before leaving the law, there were other good things that happened too. Of course, first and foremost was the release of Nelson Mandela and the first free and democratic elections in South Africa. Second, I found my passion in immigration law fairly early in my career. It's a small area of law, but for me, it had the great impact. I never took for granted a client who had entrusted me with their immigration application. I was responsible for changing their lives forever, quite literally. Third, I was fortunate to work for leading immigration lawyers in Toronto while undergoing my NCA studies in abridged articles. Not only was I taught about the law, but I was taught the business of law. And that included how to talk to a client, how to differentiate yourself in the market, and how to monetize a firm. Fourth, I also had a hand in the complete overhaul by the Supreme Court of the medical inadmissibility provisions of the immigration regulations. I represented a client by the name of David Helowitz and processed his application for permanent residence under the investor category. He had a son who had a disability, who was found to be medically inadmissible to Canada. Before the file was refused, I wrote a 2-page letter to show that the jurisprudence was moving away from the objective definition of excessive demand in favor of a more individualized approach to take into account the willingness and ability of the applicants to pay for social or medical services. The Supreme Court agreed, and the legislation and policy was amended accordingly. I had my 15 minutes of fame. I look back on my life in law fondly. I do miss it. But these days I devote myself to living as best a life I can and inspiring others to do the same. So in concluding, I'd like to leave you with my list of do's and don'ts based on my career. So here goes. Always remain true to yourself. Be authentic. Don't allow yourself to be duped by a client. Work hard, but work hard for the right reasons. Serve your clients to the best of your ability. Learn to say no to your boss. Focus on exceeding your client's expectations. Pick up the phone. Don't hide behind voicemail. Always return a client's call, even if there's nothing to update them on. Never send an email in anger. By all means, draft it, but rest on it for at least 24 hours. You'll probably change it in the morning. Never deliver bad news by email either. Pick up the phone. Apologize when you have to. A client will be more willing to forgive you when you do. Always know that there is a solution. Never bury a mistake. Perpetuating a lie will take its toll on you. Expect to be sued. It will keep you focused. You will get audited by the Law Society. Don't take it personally. Judge your success as a lawyer by the impact made on the lives of your clients, not by the car that you drive. Reach beyond your comfort zone. Stretch yourself. Take on that difficult case or even a difficult client. Look after your staff and they'll look after your client. Life in law can be a slog or boring, but stick it out. You'll have your moment to shine. Take time for yourself. Find that balance. Breathe deeply. And don't wait for the pain of diagnosis before focusing on your life. Live each day like you received bad news yesterday. Thank you.
Wow. Larry, I knew your story was powerful, but wow. Thank you for sharing that with us. And I'm sure there are an awful lot of questions from everybody, but I'm going to kick off with one whilst everybody takes a minute to breathe and to think about their questions for Larry. But Larry, I was reading your book, which is called Shaken Not Stirred, Living with Parkinson's Disease. And it's a great book, and I've really enjoyed reading it. I haven't quite finished it. I ran out of time to finish it, but I'm going to go and finish it. But it was very it was a very easy read. It was like listening to you talk just then as you went through your story. And one of the things that stuck out to me was your appreciation of mindfulness.
Right.
And you discuss mindfulness and you discuss it, how it's different to meditation. Now, I've just started meditating recently. I'm a very newbie person to it,
Right.
but it's definitely having an effect on me and my life through it. And I've heard about mindfulness, but could you maybe share why mindfulness has been useful for you as a tool with your Parkinson's, but also just generally in your life?
Yeah, probably, as you know, Parkinson's, the image of Parkinson's is the shaking and the tremors. But there's a whole host of non-physical symptoms as well. And as I mentioned, anxiety, depression are some of those. So what I did is I devoted a lot of time to the physicality of my condition, the running, the drumming. But on the mental side, mindfulness or meditation has helped me tremendously. And, my words of encouragement to people who are trying it out is don't be intimidated by the word meditation. It's all about just being in the moment and focusing on your breath. And I spend quite a bit of time talking about the breath because fundamentally we all breathe, but the difference is how we breathe. And if you can control your breathing, you can't be in an agitated state and a calm state at the same time. So if you focus on your breath, you can calm your flight or fight syndrome, and it calms me down. And I use it whenever I need to, before a meeting that I used to do. So what I do is every morning for 15 minutes, I do use that practice, and it does calm me down. But it could be anything to ground you in the moment. And I just focus on my breath. But if you stop, pause, listen, observe, hear, taste, smell, that will ground you in a similar basis to keep you in the moment. So that's what I have done.
Is it one of those practices that you almost wish you'd learn about earlier on, especially during your law career? As you said, like maybe it would have been useful to have had that tool earlier rather than unfortunately finding out about it at a later stage.
Yeah. What I did though, when I was still practicing, is that I introduced that into the practice. I was the HR manager or partner, and I thought of bringing mindfulness into the practice, and I tried to train the partners and the staff in mindful messaging. Some of the things that I learned was don't send that email in anger. So practice mindfulness in that context. Also, as a partner, I always said that practice mindfully as a partner. How you hold yourself out is very important. Be in the moment. Don't ask a staff member, how was the weekend, and then disappear down the corridor. Practice mindfulness in everything that you do. Mindful meetings I introduced as well. Don't bring your cell phone. Don't bring your computer. Be mindful in the meeting. So I try to encourage that in the practice as well, because I think there's something to be said about mindfulness in the boardroom and in a personal situation.
Absolutely, because especially now, right, with technology all around us, and now when we're all working, many of us are working from home, and you have all those additional distractions around you because you're not in that more controlled environment that maybe you were if you were in the office. It can be hard to separate everything and just focus on that one task in front of you. So yeah, maybe mindfulness is a technique that all of us could try applying on Tuesday when you go back to work or when you start back at school again, and see if it makes a difference to you. And I like the idea that it doesn't have to be a forced, I must sit down and meditate now. I love the fact that in your book you talk about, and you just mentioned it here as well, where it can be as simple as just listening, observing, and concentrating on how you breathe, because as you say in the book, you go into this in a bit more detail. Apparently, when we breathe, and I didn't know this until I read the book, breathing is one of the only things that we do where it's automatic and also can be controlled. And so there's also two ways you can breathe. And that by using mindfulness, you're actually taking control over the automaticness that you breathe without even realizing you're breathing. And I really enjoyed how you put that into the words and in the book, and how you actually made that make sense to me. Until then, I was like, straight.
You did read the book.
I did read the book. I found it fascinating. I really enjoyed the book. I have to say, I'm going to pass the book on to the next person to read it as well. But I don't want to be doing all of the talking. I know there's some questions in coming in as well for you, Larry. So I'm going to ask each person to read to say their questions out loud, but you can also read them as well. So we're going to start with Chikosi, and then we're going to go to Jawad, and then we're going to go to Sarah. Okay, purely the reasoning is because that's the order the questions came in. So if you have a question, please do drop it in the chat and we'll get to you next. So Chikosi.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much for sharing.
Sure.
I wanted I wanted your perspective on what you feel is the connection between mindfulness and being intentional with what we do.
I think the two are very similar. I think being mindful means that you're focusing on the present. And I think focusing on the present is intentional living. So I was, caught up in, when I got diagnosed, the past, I was living in the past and then focusing on the future. And that resulted in my anxiety going through the roof. Intentional living keeps you grounded in the present. I think you've got to, learn from the past and somewhat plan for the future. But intentional living is the goal. Mindfulness is a tool to help you live intentionally in the present. That's the way I define it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Great question, Chikosi. Jawad, are you there? There you are. Perfect, you're next.
Hi, Larry. It was a very inspiring story and, absolutely amazing to hear you speak. I've got a mouthful of questions.
Sure.
The first is that, because you've moved and resettled and requalified in 2 different countries, I just wanted to get a sense of how necessary it was for you to culturally adapt each time you moved. And I wanted you to sort of comment, if possible, on how easy or how difficult was it, and if you had any advice to share.
Yeah.
And the second question would be, what legal skills did you feel are universally transferable, regardless of the jurisdictions that you've moved to?
I think on the first question, I may forget the second question, but the question of adapting, I think the trick to my survival in going to New Zealand and in Canada was willing to accept the fact that nobody knew who I was, but I saw that as an opportunity. So I was willing to do whatever I could to qualify as quickly as possible, because I had some friends who took 30 years before they qualified, and that was more difficult. So I think it's the willingness and openness to accept and adopt and regard yourself as a citizen of that country. I made tremendous friends in New Zealand, equally in Canada when I arrived. And I think that is also, was great. The challenge, obviously, as an immigrant is I arrived with, literally 2 suitcases in New Zealand and maybe 3 because I had my son when we arrived in Canada. And I didn't have the history. I didn't have the friends from university to rely on. And I think that's the challenge. And I think it goes to this topic of, looking for a job. And at the interview, they say, well, what is your Canadian experience? I've just arrived a week ago. But it's a catch-22 situation. So I think it's just a willingness to adapt, but keeping, as I said in my list, keeping authentic to yourself. I wouldn't take a job that I didn't feel comfortable with. The issue was also, as I was relicensing, I was the oldest in my sort of, year. But I realized that those were the pains of immigration. I had that big picture of why I immigrated. So I hope that answers that first question. The second question about transferable skills is I was fortunate in the sense that when I arrived in Canada, I kind of knew what I wanted to do. And as I said, immigration law, I started practicing in New Zealand, traveling to South Africa and filing applications for people who wanted to immigrate to New Zealand. So in a way, I knew what I wanted to do. That's okay. And so I think you've got to find that niche as soon as you can, and then be focused on that for as long as you can. And unless you don't have any traction, then I would change direction. And also, the client service game, that's pretty universal. How to listen, how to talk, how to be, strong in silence. I was like a sponge in all the jobs that I took, in the sense that I used to sit and observe and learn. And I think that it requires some patience to do. You're welcome.
We've got a new addition to the team tonight.
Yes, that's right.
It's so interesting. So do you feel, I'm going to expand on that before we go to you, Sarah, before we jump topics slightly. Do you feel that because you were an immigrant yourself, that really led you into becoming an immigration lawyer through your own personal experience?
Yeah, no doubt about that. I mean, I arrived in New Zealand with my wife, Melissa, and we were on visitor visas. And I remember lining up at the New Zealand Immigration Service at 4 a.m. to process our papers. Canada, I did have an immigration lawyer assisting us, but I think definitely there was that commonality to what I was trying to do. I never pushed it though. I didn't insist that people retain me because I was an immigrant. But I think as I said in my list, if you're authentic and genuine, that sort of comes through. And truthfully, I'm still getting calls 30 years later about still people that I assisted. In fact, the funny thing is, our next door neighbor, I live in the suburbs now. I moved from the beaches in Toronto when I extracted from my practice. Our next door neighbor is a client that I helped do his papers 25 years ago. I never knew that. So I think, you've just got to be true to yourself and just go for it.
Fantastic. I'm going to switch tracks slightly with Sarah's question. So Sarah, Are you ready?
Yes, sorry, it was really inspiring. Thank you so much for your story tonight and for your book. So I wanted to ask, first of all, relating to the previous questions, was it your first choice of specialization, the immigration law, or did you, as you said, come up with it on the way because of you moved from out of South Africa and then England?
Yeah, so I started off in South Africa when I was eventually qualified. I was in a commercial litigation firm, and I was very young at the game, so I didn't have much exposure. Getting to New Zealand, I mean, in terms of survival, I had my first job offer in banking and finance. And that was, as I said, a bad mistake because I'm not a banking and finance person. Immigration was a fun part of it because there was a lot of travel involved. I used to travel to far and wide places. And in fact, I used to travel to South Africa so often that I had my designated seat on the plane and knew the pilots who invited me onto the flight deck when I flew into South Africa. So in terms of that's just a side note on some of the perks of that. But I think immigration law was nice for me because it's a small area of the law. It's not intense, but the impact is great. And I started that in the same firm in New Zealand when I was doing banking and finance. Once I had qualified as a lawyer, I started introducing immigration to the firm. And that's what led me into New Zealand immigration law. I traveled back to South Africa, set up shop in South Africa for about 6 months, recruiting people who were leaving under, those circumstances as I described. And I thought it was a feel-good area of the law because, people entrusted you with their application, and it was a good captive market to be in. And I've enjoyed that. The litigation side with the Supreme Court decision was very important for me, but I enjoyed the fact that, people got onto a plane with a package of documentation and came to Canada. And then in the corporate world, I started doing the work permits, and I used to travel to the border with clients, and I just enjoyed the client interaction that came with it. So that's why I stuck with it.
Thank you. Thank you. And I had a follow-up question, but it's not related to what you just mentioned. It's when you explained the situation about Eugenia,
Yes.
how did you find out about her situation? How late, or how did it come up?
Well, I spent a lot of time with Eugenia because, growing up. So she used to tell me stories. I mean, she was there. I spoke about when getting me ready for school, but she was also there when I came home from school. And just as a young kid growing up, those were the kind of stories that I started to hear from her. And it was really quite an interesting time because growing up, I didn't know what I could do about it. That was the biggest issue. At university, obviously, I was at a liberal university, so I learned about the law. But with Eugenia, she was part of my family. I broke my leg playing soccer, and I remember she carried me from the car up to our apartment, and helped me in the bed. So I didn't know her side of the story until I started talking to her. But from my perspective, in that ignorant place, she was still part of our family. But I didn't know anything about it, and came to realize as I started talking to her how different our lives and opportunities were based on this apartheid system in South Africa.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Some great questions. More coming in. Janet.
Sure.
Thanks, Larry. I'm curious about some of the most memorable moments of your career, or the most impactful things during your practice.
I think Hillerwitz was my 15 minutes of fame, but I do think that my admission as a partner after my diagnosis ranks up there because I had disclosed my condition to everybody, and they knew about my condition going in, but I had tremendous support. So that was very memorable. I mean, I know that we all as lawyers strive to be a partner. I'm just saying that in my case, it was memorable because once you disclose a chronic illness, it could have an impact, and in my case, I was lucky because I was still maintaining my, the physicality of my condition. I didn't have the cognitive challenges then that I do now. So I had tremendous support. But that whole episode fortified and encouraged me that an employer could be there to support you. I have, through my support services, involvement in the community these days, have seen some other, bad examples. But I think I was lucky. My other 15 minutes of fame was flying with a client in his private jet from Buffalo, New York, to process his application in Toronto for his family's immigration. So that was a big thing for me. I was on a flight deck on a private jet. The only problem was that the flight only lasted 15 minutes. But he was a guy who had years of unlawful residence in Canada and had to tidy it up. And immigration said that if you land in Canada, we're going to arrest you. So I was on the plane to assist him. I eventually, I did manage to assist him. And for about 5 years after that, I did get a bottle of whiskey, but my claim to fame was being on his private jet for 15 minutes, literally.
That's very cool. I don't know how many people can say they've been on a private jet with a client just in case immigration denied them landing rights.
Yeah, that's right.
Everything else that I'm sure you were doing on that deal in the background. But it sounds very glamorous. I mean, you were talking of Rumpole of the Bailey earlier.
Yes.
People have very confused faces and completely understand, because Rumpole of the Bailey is not on every single network out there these days.
That's right.
But
That's
I
right.
can share a link in the chat for it. And Rumpole of the Bailey was something that I grew up with, and I've got to say, like, that's what I thought the law was going to be like.
Right.
And then you said LA law, and I was like, yep, that was the uber glamorous side of
yes,
law.
absolutely.
The American style of law compared
right.
to like the British style of wigs and gowns and
right.
standing
right.
at the bench and things. How different was it in practice to those images that you grew up with of Rumpole of the Bailey and LA law, and then your actual practice in 3 different jurisdictions around the world? Did it resemble anything like you saw on TV?
No, and in South Africa it was particularly bad because in my last year I had to do an analysis of the court system and the punishments that were handed down by the magistrates. And I broke it down into race because I tried to analyze the fact that race played such a huge part of the sentencing. And so that is, obviously that's not glamorous at all. And it was really real at that time. What I also did though is I went to the courts only to listen to the barristers present cases. Because in South Africa, it was you were either an attorney or a barrister. It wasn't a fuse bar like we have here. So you had attorneys and advocates. So I used to go up to the courthouse and sit in the back row and listen and observe these highly polished, skilled orators, who used to perform like Rumpole, swinging a watch, on a fob and, putting it into the jacket pocket. And seeing the skill of that, and I was amazed. I was never in that category, but I was always fascinated at the ability to use words to convince people of a result. I think I channeled that in my immigration practice because there were times that I used to duke it out on the phone with an immigration officer who was, detaining or threatening to refuse an applicant who was applying for a work permit. And I used to spend hours and developed a somewhat, good reputation because they knew that if I got onto the phone, I never was belligerent. I never used to shout. I used to just say, look, with respect, Section 78 doesn't say that. And it used to take hours, but I used to convince them. So I think I ingrained some of those skills into my practice.
That's fantastic. So there is a blending of real life and fiction almost, in that you've emulated some of that fiction and you've taken the best parts, I would say, from the fiction and applied it to the real world.
Yep.
That's amazing. I love that. Yeah, I wish I had that orator skill. I mean, it really is something incredible to watch when it's done well.
Right.
And I'm sure some people are born with that skill, but it's also something you can learn, I guess, over time as well. Through studying and watching.
Right. When I was a young lawyer, I used to sit in my mentor's office and just used to listen to the way he spoke to the client and the way he analyzed the situation. And that was great. Great learning opportunity as well. Even though we were literally sharing offices, I was there just to observe and learn. So I took that opportunity as well.
Yeah, from my own personal experience, I'm really missing that opportunity to just sit in my partner's office right now, because I would just sit and listen when he was on the phone, and listen to the like one side of the conversation almost, because sometimes he wasn't even on loudspeaker. He'd literally just be on the phone. And I don't have that opportunity now with working remotely, and I'm definitely missing that, because you do pick up on so many social cues and different ways to approach different clients in different situations, or the same client in a different situation, because it's that people, we're in the people business.
That's right. And don't ever underestimate those soft skills, because, you know, we're all lawyers, we all know the law, and we'll practice the law, but the soft skills are equally as important, because you learn to be creative, you learn to be you learn to empathize with your client, and you learn to understand what your client's all about. And you know, the phone will keep ringing. So it's not just processing a file. I used to tell my staff that every file is an opportunity to engage and foster a relationship with your client. You know, that phone call, it was so important. I insisted that every file starts with a telephone discussion, a 5-minute telephone discussion. You do the assessment and they listen to you. And basically, you've got their back throughout the whole process, as opposed to some other firms at the time that just bang out the, you know, the emails and the process and the list of documentation. There's no opportunity to engage. So that's where I think that good blend of the hard skills, of the knowledge of the law, and the soft skills could make a winnable and very differential in the marketplace, become very differential in the marketplace for success.
Top tip, everyone. Remember that one, besides the other 10 tips. Earlier, but yeah, I do think that's a great way of describing how you can differentiate yourself, and maybe your experience, Larry, with moving to different countries and experience different systems and different cultures gave you an added advantage with that, because you were already slightly more aware of some of those nuances and differences. And by being able to articulate that to potential employers and to potential clients in the future and colleagues, that was one of your differentiating factors. Stand out with other people.
Right. Yep.
That's awesome. Does anyone else have a question for Larry? I know I see lots of nodding heads, just like everyone's like, yeah, this is so good. I'm just like soaking it all up, all this knowledge, and, you know, ready to put it into practice, because we have a really wide variety of people on the call today, Larry. We have people currently doing their LLBs around the world, all the way through to people who are about to start articling. Any day now, they're just waiting for the nod, and then other people who are practicing as well. So we've got a real mixture through the whole process, and some people from around the world as well.
I think it's great. I think, you know, based on my experience, I had a very small group when I came to Canada, and I'm still friendly with them. And I think, you know, what you're doing with, you know, the website and your support system here is tremendous. I mean, this is what I think, you know, I need it, and I'm so pleased that you've got the support system. When you arrive, you know, as an immigrant, you've got those 2 suitcases, you don't know anybody, but here you've got this complete blend of support, and you must lean on it, and I think it's tremendous. It will set you up for success. What you're doing is setting people up for success, not failure, and it's very commendable work that you do.
Well, thank you. We're very grateful that you're part of our community now, and that you found us through the power of the internet, and that you're now here and sharing and supporting the next wave of internationally trained lawyers through the process. But Janet has a great question for you.
Sure.
Yes, Larry, I'm curious, what's next? What are your plans for the future?
A great question. I'm doing a lot of work with the Parkinson Canada not-for-profit. I'm the incoming chair of the Parkinson Advisory Council. I think it's time to start engaging with the community and sharing my experience and helping them. I'm thinking of my next book. I don't know what the topics are at the moment, but I'm just enjoying my station in life at the moment. But I don't know. I can't go back to law. But I still think there's a future out there for me somewhere. So I think a book, playing the drums, exercising, and giving back to the community.
That's fantastic. And maybe you'll see Janet out on the roads, as she just qualified for Chicago for the marathon. So maybe you'll see her out there stomping her feet while she gets in some training, and you guys could be running buddies from across the country.
Yeah, I think marathons are great. I needed half marathons, but that's good. Fantastic.
Half marathons are nothing to sniff at. Yeah. That's 21.1 kilometers right there. That's, you know, a long way.
Right.
Right now, my level is running for the bus.
Nothing wrong with that. And breathe. And breathe.
On that one. And breathing. I'm definitely working on the breathing. Something that I personally found out I only use half of my lung capacity most of the time because I have terrible breathing. And it's something that I have been focusing on for the last couple of years, is learning how to breathe and using all of my rib cage. And without appreciating it, inadvertently, I have been meditating and doing mindfulness just through the act of learning how to use my entire rib cage again, which is an interesting whole conversation I'm sure we could have just in breathing techniques and different ways of doing it, but probably not super useful for everybody on this call right now. But it is in the book, and it's a fascinating book. And I have to say thank you very much to Larry for sending me a copy of this book, because I really did enjoy it. I'm not just saying that because he's here tonight. It was exactly the kind of book I needed over the last week. It was uplifting and thought-provoking in a number of different ways, and looking at concepts and situations, and reminding yourself that although you're in the middle of it, you can find a way to step back and view it in a slightly different way, and maybe you'll find a path.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
And it may not be the path you originally envisaged for yourself, and it may probably 100% not be the path that other people envisaged for you, but yet you found a path, and here you are, and you're about to start on a second book. And I'm very grateful that you came here tonight to share your story with us, and hopefully we are just the start of your journey of sharing your story with other people and helping other people go through situations that they're going through.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. You know, the book is about Parkinson's, but I think it could equally apply to anybody who faces a challenge, you know, a chronic illness, a diagnosis, obviously, but any challenge. And I think it comes down to the point of those 5 stages of grief, to the point of acceptance, and then, you know, getting on with your life in that altered state. But at least you can still live a full life. That's my message. So thank you for the opportunity. I wish you and everybody the best. I'd love to pop in and drop by and keep you posted on how things are going. I'd love to hear some of your stories. And just, you know, be supportive of each other.
We would love to have you back anytime. You are always welcome, Larry. It's been an absolute honor to hear your story tonight. And thank you, everybody, for your questions. They were fantastic questions, really engaging. And I really feel like you've brought out some more of Larry's story as well tonight through your questions. So, Larry, thank you again. Everyone else, thank you for joining us. We will be back on Tuesday at an earlier time of 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 p.m. Eastern, where we will be joined by Melissa Lippman, who is a stylist. And she'll be coming on to talk to us about how do we go from the world of Zoom maybe back into the world of human beings face to face, and how do we find our style that represents who we want people to see us as. Because our clothes are a costume. They're a way of putting on our armor to show the world who we are, who we want to be seen as. So if you can join us, please join us on Tuesday for that session, and keep an eye on our website, because we are putting out more events over the next couple of months, and we hope to see you there. And Larry, once again, thank you so much, and have a lovely long weekend, everybody, and we'll see you all soon.
Thank you. All the best. Cheers.